We lived in a quiet cul-de-sac in Waverly, Oregon, surrounded by dogwood trees and the kind of neighbors who remembered birthdays and brought over casserole when someone got sick. I was 42. My wife, Sarah, was 40. We had 2 kids, Grace, a bright freshman at Stanford, and Eli, our 15-year-old who had recently become enamored with electric guitars and existential philosophy. To anyone watching from the outside, we were the textbook definition of a stable American family. Safe. Predictable. Sarah and I had been married for 15 years. We met at a college party where she wore a polka-dot dress and carried a copy of The Bell Jar under one arm. She said she liked the way I pronounced sociology like it was something edible. It was all slow-burning romance and matching coffee mugs after that. Our routine was comfortable. Saturday mornings were for pancakes and cleaning. Sunday evenings, board games and whiskey. We rarely fought, and when we did, it was over something comically domestic like whether the towel should be folded in thirds or rolled. The only guests we ever really had over were Claire and Matt Wilburn, our closest friends since our newlywed years. Claire had been Sarah's college roommate. Matt and I bonded over poker and shared loathing for HOA meetings. When they came over, it was tradition, drinks, board games, and enough nostalgia to make the air thick. Sarah and Matt always stayed up the latest, talking into the early morning hours. Claire and I would both knock out by midnight, she in the guest room, me in our bedroom. It had been that way for years. Never a flicker of suspicion. Not even a ghost of doubt. Until last Friday. The night started like any other. Wine flowed. Stories were told. Laughter came easy. Around 11 p.m., Claire turned in, mumbling something about early meetings. I stayed up a little longer, but my body was exhausted from a week of tax season accounting nightmares. When I kissed Sarah goodnight, she was on the back porch with Matt, 2 whiskeys in, laughing about something from their college days. I should have felt safe. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Maybe it was the whiskey, maybe just the change in Eli's sleeping patterns that kept me alert. At 2:14 a.m., I heard something. It was a floorboard. Our basement stairs creaked only when you stepped on the third one from the bottom. It sounded again. Soft, but clear. Half asleep and half dreaming, I thought maybe Eli was sneaking snacks or sneaking calls. I got up, not quite sure what I expected. But what I didn't expect was the faint sound of voices. Or the glow of the basement light still on. I opened the door quietly. Each step downward was a throb in my chest. And then, there they were. Sarah and Matt. Too close. He was leaning over her. Her hand was on his chest. Laughter. That kind of laughter you don't fake. My body turned cold. They hadn't seen me yet. I stood in the shadow like a ghost that didn't know it was dead. And in that moment, a stillness came over me. A clarity. I thought of Eli upstairs. I thought of Grace, probably working through freshman calculus across the state. I thought of 15 years worth of board games and folded towels. And I quietly said, Matt. He turned. So did Sarah. The blood drained from their faces like someone pulled the plug on a bathtub. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. My voice was even. You need to leave. Now. Sarah opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I walked back upstairs and lay down beside Claire in the guest room. She stirred. Claire, I said. I'm going to tell you something hard. You need to stay quiet. Eli's in the next room. She sat up slowly. My voice didn't shake. Matt and Sarah. I just saw them. In the basement. Together. Her hand flew to her mouth. I need you to take him and leave. Tonight. She didn't argue. Didn't sob. Just nodded, with tears already forming. Matt was gone within the hour. But the real storm was only beginning. The next morning, Sarah made coffee as if nothing had happened. French press, 2 spoons of sugar, oat milk. As if she were just another wife who woke up in a warm kitchen, not the one who blew up 15 years of our marriage. I watched her move around, still in the same t-shirt she had slept in, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, of the crater she had left in me. She placed the cup in front of me as if it were a sign of peace. Or worse, a publicity stunt. Thanks, I muttered and took a sip. The coffee was still warm. Just the way I liked it. And still a lie. And the craziest thing? I almost didn't say anything. I almost swallowed it all with my coffee, chalking it up to a dream or a misunderstanding. Because part of me still wanted to believe that we were invincible. Then Eli walked in, his jacket half unbuttoned, his hair tousled. "Good morning," he yawned, grabbing a bowl of cereal. I looked at him, this boy with electric guitars and big dreams, and realized that if I kept lying, I would teach him that sitting quietly in a burning house was normal. When Eli left for school, I sat down across from Sarah. "How long?" I asked in a voice that sounded like sandpaper. She blinked. As if I had asked her about the weather. "It's not what it looks like." I almost laughed out loud. But my lips had forgotten how to do that. She exhaled. Long measured. "It happened once a few months ago. And, again last night. That's all. Twice. Twice is intent. Twice is a response to betrayal with a handwritten thank you note. So it was, what, an accident?" She shook her head. "No. It's not because of Matt. It's because of me." "Yeah, right. Self-discovery through betrayal, a modern classic." "I hope you found yourself," I said. The black humor came later. I told my therapist that if cheating were a Fortune 500 company, Sarah would be its CEO, with a corner office, a golden parachute, and a plaque in the Hall of Fame for outstanding achievements in emotional evasion. Vertical integration of lies, horizontal expansion into a broken heart, and quarterly bonuses paid in the form of betrayal. He tried to help me emotionally, but I heard something completely different in his words. It was as if the doctor wanted to say, "I understand you, but you'll need some whiskey for this." At night, I lay next to her, not with love, but with the clinical patience of a demolition expert inspecting a condemned building. I wanted to leave, to be done with it, but curiosity pinned me there. Would she collapse quietly, or bring down half the neighborhood with her? The following days passed like slow freight trains, heavy, rumbling, doomed to derail. Sarah didn't give up. She cooked dinner. She asked how my day had been. She smiled the way people smile when they try to tape up a broken window before the rain. It was an impressive performance. Worthy of an Oscar. I responded with one-word grunts, the language of a man who has nothing left to build. She asked, "Is chicken okay?" and I nodded. She asked, "Do you want to watch something?" and I shrugged. The real conversations took place in my head, where I imagined myself constructing a timeline with pins and red thread, like in a cheap detective series, connecting moments that previously had no meaning. That time she was late for work and didn't answer my messages. That weekend when she insisted I take Eli camping while she'd caught up on housework. Those moments when Matt laughed too easily at her jokes and she touched his hand too lightly. Each memory fit into place like an uneven piece of a puzzle. Meanwhile, Eli was running around the house, oblivious to everything. He was preparing for the school talent show, working on his first public solo guitar performance. One evening, he walked into the living room carrying the battered Fender guitar we had bought him for Christmas. "Hi, Dad," he said, his voice trembling a little, as teenagers' voices do. "Yes, son? Can you listen to my song? Tell me if it's bad." I wanted to tell him that it would never be bad if he wrote it. But the truth stuck in my throat like a fishhook. Because part of me was afraid. Afraid that I would look at him and see another lie. Another person who trusted me to tell the truth, even if it hurt. I swallowed it. "Play," I said and tried to smile. He played a Nirvana cover, rough, a little off-key, but very sincere. When he finished, I applauded, louder than necessary. His face lit up. And for a second, I remembered why people try to survive earthquakes, because sometimes there are houses worth saving. Sarah was watching from the doorway, her arms crossed. Something in her eyes flickered for a moment. Maybe it was a tiny spark of guilt. Or maybe she was just cold. That night, she tried again. "Can we talk?" she whispered when Eli went upstairs. I nodded, but only because arguing was harder than I could afford. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, like contestants on a game show called Who's More Miserable. She started crying in the middle of her apology, pitifully, with hiccups that made her seem small and scared. "It was stupid," she said. "It's not even about Matt. I don't even like Matt. It was." She fell silent. I waited. It was because of the feeling that I was noticed, she finally said. Noticed. I wanted to laugh loud, ugly. Noticed. Like she was some kind of museum relic that needed a new tour guide. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and said, "You know what's funny? You never once asked if I felt noticed." That made her fall silent. The silence lasted so long that it became like a living thing, pulsing between us. Finally, she whispered, "What do you want me to do?" And for the first time, I answered honestly. I don't know. Because I didn't know. I didn't know if I wanted her to fight for me or just make it easier for me to leave. I didn't know if I wanted to burn everything to the ground or sit among the ruins pretending the ashes were snow. The only thing I knew for sure? The life we had was over, and I wanted to end it as quickly as possible and forget her. I was halfway through writing a letter to my therapist to cancel our next session, too exhausted to release any more emotions, when the doorbell rang. 3 times. Aggressively. Like a UPS courier who was angry about something. Sarah opened the door. And there she was. Rita. Sarah's older sister. It's a bit like putting a grenade in the middle of the room. Technically it's safe and calm, but one wrong move and it'll explode like a firecracker. To put it mildly, she's a little out of control at times. Surprise! Rita beamed, dragging 2 suitcases on wheels behind her and wearing a leopard print coat that looked like it had its own Instagram account. I had a little fight with Gary. I thought there was no better place to lick my wounds than at my beloved sister's and her husband's. She said husband the way people say rash. I stood in the hallway with a cup of coffee in my hand, wearing socks that said best dad in the world and a barely concealed look of fear. We didn't know you were coming, Sarah said, smiling through clenched teeth. Well, if we had, we would have locked the door. Rita laughed, as if it were charming. But it wasn't charming. It was a threat disguised as a joke. She burst into the house with the grace of a demolition crew. By dinner, she had rearranged the magnets on the refrigerator according to the colors of the chakras and lectured Eli on the dangers of fluoride. I'm just saying, she said, chewing on her quinoa salad, that your pineal gland is basically under siege. Ellie blinked. My what gland? Your third eye, dear. You have to protect it. Sarah glanced at me over her baked vegetables, her expression saying, "This is your punishment." I responded with a look that said, "You were with Matt. Enjoy the consequences." And yet, somehow, Rita changed the atmosphere in the house. Her presence forced us to play our roles again. Smiles at dinner. Small talk in the morning. We were like 2 spies pretending to be a married couple, hiding deadly secrets and a grenade in the guest room. Of course, Rita could sense the tension. She was as sensitive as a hammer wrapped in glitter. Is everything okay? She asked on the 3rd day, leaning on the kitchen counter like a nosy neighbor from a soap opera. There's such an atmosphere of silent doom. Like a couple who decorate the house together but haven't touched each other since 2000. I almost spit out my coffee. Sarah gritted her teeth and replied, "We're fine." Yeah, said Rita, nodding like a lie detector on a TV game show. Because I may be lonely and a little crazy, but I know what marriage looks like. This isn't it. It was strangely comforting. Like being mocked at your own funeral. Of course, it was inappropriate. But at least someone was paying attention to us. That evening, Sarah and I watched TV together for the first time in weeks. Mainly because Rita had taken over the guest room and was listening to whale sounds on her phone at full volume, as if it were a spa and not a war zone. We didn't talk much. We just watched. An old episode of Cheers. When the credits rolled, I turned to Sarah and said quietly, "Remember how we used to laugh like that?" She looked at me, her eyes softer than they had been in days. "Yes," she said. "I miss that." And for a moment, it seemed that something real was still smoldering among the ashes. But Rita was snoring in the next room, as if a chainsaw were being dragged across linoleum, and the moment passed. But still. It was something. It happened on Tuesday. You'd think that such devastating betrayals would at least have the decency to happen on a Friday, to give you the weekend to recover. But no. This betrayal happened at 3:47 p.m. on Tuesday, while I was updating my budget spreadsheet and listening to music on repeat from my bank. Sarah texted, "Going to Trader Joe's. Want anything?" I replied, "No, I'm good." And then, out of pure habit or perhaps a dying instinct, I checked the app one had installed a few weeks ago to track her location. Just something I hadn't deleted. I expected to see a little blue dot hovering over the Trader Joe's parking lot. But it wasn't there. She was at the Everly Inn, a boutique hotel 10 minutes from our house. The kind of place you don't go to for groceries unless your bananas wear silk robes. I froze. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for a moment the absurdity of the situation made me laugh. A real laugh. The kind that has a taste of irony and sarcasm. Here I was, calculating third quarter forecasts, and my wife was probably committing financial equivalent of embezzlement using her body. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and drove off. Not fast. Not slow. Just at an inevitable speed. The parking lot was almost empty. A few SUVs, a Tesla, and one unmistakable dark blue Ford Edge. Matt's car. I parked, not knowing what would happen next. I wasn't the type of man who storms into a hotel lobby demanding blood. I wasn't even the type of man who raises his voice when someone takes my parking spot. But in that moment, I became a different person. Not angry. Not broken. Just awake. I walked into the lobby, nodded to the concierge, and took the elevator to the second floor. I knew the layout. We had stayed here once, long ago, on our anniversary. Room 212. I stood in front of the door. Raised my hand. Then lowered it. I didn't knock. Just leaned in. Listened. Muffled laughter. Then a loud bang. Then silence. My hand was still on the doorknob when she turned around. Matt. Half naked, surprised. As surprised as you can be when you open the door. As surprised as when you realize that the past has caught up with you. Behind him, I saw Sarah. Her hair was disheveled. Her eyes were wide open. "Logan," she said, her voice filled with shock and guilt. "I can explain." "You always can," I said. "That's never been a problem." Matt started to say something, but I raised my hand. "No. Not unless you're ready to say what I really want to hear." He blinked. "What is it?" "Goodbye." He hesitated. Then he nodded. He walked past me. Down the hallway. I turned back to Sarah. She was shaking. Not crying. Just shaking, as if her nervous system was rebooting. She reached out to me, more out of instinct than love. I stepped back. "I want a divorce," I said. Calmly. Evenly. She didn't argue. She just looked at me and said, "I was afraid you would say that." I turned around. I left. I didn't look back. When I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt better. You might think that ending a marriage is like cutting a taut wire and watching it snap. Something loud. Something clear. But it's not like that. It was more like walking into a house that had been slowly filling with water for years, and only then realizing that you're knee-deep in water, drowning, and that it's not going to stop. I didn't go home. Instead, I parked in Riverside Park, where Eli learned to ride his bike, wobbling along the paths while Sarah cheered him on and applauded him. I sat in the car watching the sun set behind the trees and thinking about how many other things I loved had been secretly poisoned. My phone buzzed. A text message. "Sarah, please talk to me. Please." I put the phone face down on the passenger seat, as if it might bite me. Instead of replying, I took out a note I had kept for years, "Why I love Sarah." It was a list I had made on our 10th anniversary. Back then, I still believed in anniversaries. Things like her laugh when she's tired and the way she narrates nature documentaries with a bad British accent. I read each line and felt them rot in my hands. Like trying to hug the skeleton of something you once loved. I threw it away. But I didn't feel any better. The house was dark. Rita's suitcases were still in the hallway, like forgotten promises. I almost expected her to jump out from behind the door and offer some mystical marriage cure involving crystal pyramids and herbal teas. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. She looked up. "I'm sorry," she said. The words hung in the air, limp. Like old clothes left out after a storm. I'm sorry, I repeated. For what? Her lips trembled. For everything. Be more specific, I said. You owe me that. She stared at the cup. Her shoulders slumped. I felt invisible. I don't know, stupid. Old. I wanted to remember what it was like to be noticed. Noticed. That damn word again. It was as if she had been living in a mirror maze and only now realized that everything had been distorted. You were never invisible, I said. You just stopped seeing. It hit her. I could see it. She flinched as if she had been whipped in slow motion. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. I still love you, she said. And for the first time, I didn't doubt it. But love isn't a disinfectant. It doesn't wash away betrayal. It doesn't patch cracks. Sometimes it just lies there, a beautiful, useless relic, while your roof collapses. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. I believe you, I said. But love isn't enough. It's not enough anymore. She opened her mouth, nodded her head intermittently. The morning after the confrontation, I woke up in Eli's room. I hadn't planned to sleep there, just sat down on his bed, needing a place where the walls hadn't learned how to lie yet. But the exhaustion pulled me under. I stared at the ceiling fan, watching it spin, feeling like I was caught inside the same slow spiral. Downstairs, the house made its usual noises, the clink of dishes, the scrape of chairs, but it all sounded different now. Hollow. Like echoes inside an abandoned house. I stood and shuffled down the hallway. Eli sat at the kitchen table, untouched cereal sogging in a bowl in front of him. Sarah sat across from him, arms wrapped around herself like a life raft. They looked up when I entered, and for a second, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Morning, Eli said, his voice thin. Morning, buddy. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew better now. Words wouldn't patch this up. I poured myself a cup of coffee. Black. Bitter. It fit. As I sipped, Eli pushed his cereal away and said, Dad, can we go to the park later? Like we used to? My throat tightened. He didn't say you and me. He didn't say all of us. Just we. I nodded. After lunch, we went. No ball, no bikes. Just the two of us walking the cracked paths of Riverside Park. We reached the old oak tree near the pond, the one we'd carved our initials into years ago, a tiny family portrait hidden in bark. Eli sat down in the grass, picked up a stick, and started drawing random shapes in the dirt. Are you and Mom getting divorced? He asked without looking up. I sat down beside him. Yeah, I said. No lies. Not now. We are. He nodded, like he'd already known. It's okay, he said after a minute. I mean, it sucks. But it's okay. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. You're my kid, I said. That's never going to change. He smiled, a small, lopsided thing, then went back to his dirt drawings. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in my chest loosened. Not gone. But loosened. Then Eli's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, face lighting up in that immediate, teenage way. Is it a friend? I asked, trying to keep the envy out of my voice. Yeah. Max, he said, standing up and brushing off his jeans. He wants to meet at the skate park. Go, I said. Have fun. Eli hesitated. Then hugged me. Quick. Fierce. Then he ran off, waving. I watched him disappear down the trail. And I realized, some things survive the wreckage. Some things you carry with you. As I sat back against the oak, feeling the rough bark against my shoulders, my phone buzzed. Not Sarah. A name I hadn't seen in years. Claire. Matt's wife. My old friend. The message was short. We need to talk. I know more than you think. My pulse quickened. Claire chose the place, a cheap diner by the highway that smelled of stale toast and regret. It was the kind of place you chose when you wanted to talk about something unpleasant, but not so dramatic that it would spoil the beautiful scenery. She was already sitting in a booth, staring into her cup as if it owed her an answer. When I walked in, she stood up, looked at me, and then hugged me. Too long. Too tight. Not romantic, just familiar pain meeting familiar pain. We sat across from each other. The waitress brought coffee that neither of us had ordered. It was fine. Claire didn't engage in small talk. Matt was bragging, she said. Sarah. You. Everything. When? 6 months ago. At a company party. Too much whiskey and not enough conscience. He said it was a move to show his power. Said it was to see how a man breaks without even knowing it. My heart stopped. She continued. And it wasn't just Sarah. He made a game of it. Women from our circle of friends. From his gym. The betrayal wasn't personal. It was systemic. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Claire exhaled. Because I thought you were strong. And I wasn't ready to admit that I wasn't. There it was. The brutal honesty of two people who thought they were exceptions, not just entries in a sad registry. So what now? I asked. I left him. I filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. He doesn't even know I emptied his accounts. He thinks I'm at a yoga retreat. And what do you want me to do? Burn his car? She smiled, a little sincerely. No. But maybe we can burn the illusion you're still clinging to. That this can be saved. I didn't answer. The truth didn't need approval. There's an old saying, man is not made for defeat. A man can be destroyed but not defeated. Hemingway wrote that. I used to believe it. Until now. In the days after Claire's revelation, something inside me caved in. Not all at once. Not theatrically. Quietly. Like a house that's been abandoned too long, finally admitting it can't stand on hollow beams. I stopped sleeping in the house. It didn't feel like mine anymore. I started living out of my truck, parking in different lots, under the wide, uncaring sky. Funny how once you lose everything, the open night doesn't feel threatening. It feels honest. I thought a lot about mistakes. About how betrayal isn't born in a moment, it's built brick by every ignored conversation, every rushed goodbye, every time you looked at your phone instead of your wife. I wasn't blameless. I could see it now, all the nights I stayed late at work, not because I had to, but because it was easier than coming home. All the times I told myself things will get better without lifting a damn finger to make them better. When did I start treating marriage like autopilot? When did she start feeling invisible? Maybe betrayal was inevitable. Maybe it was just the messy invoice at the end of years of small negligence. Or maybe, as Claire hinted, it was more sinister. Maybe Matt had targeted my life like a drunk hunter, taking potshots until he hit something that bled. The difference hardly mattered now. One night, rain drumming on the roof of my truck, I opened an old notebook from my college days, one Matt hadn't managed to read. Inside, I found a quote I'd scribbled down and underlined twice. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Seneca. I laughed. A hollow, broken sound. Because for the first time, I realized this suffering was real. Tangible. Heavy enough to bruise. I sat there until the rain stopped, then drove home. Not because I forgave anyone. Not because I wanted to fix anything. Because there were still things I needed to say. Sarah was waiting. She sat on the porch steps, wrapped in an old quilt, face pale in the moonlight. She looked smaller somehow. Like a child trying to apologize for a broken window. Logan, she said, voice raw. I'm sorry. I know. I sat beside her. Not close. Not far. For a long time, we just listened to the frogs and the occasional passing car. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. You didn't mean for a lot of things, I replied. Doesn't mean they didn't happen. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I wanted to be cruel. Wanted to say something that would slice her open the way she'd gutted me. Instead, I said. We built something. Once. It was real. Even if we both let it rot. She cried harder. And I realized that was the real tragedy. Not the betrayal. The loss of something that could have been extraordinary, if only we'd been brave enough to fight for it sooner. We sat there until dawn. Two people mourning the same ghost. And in the back of my mind, a single, brutal thought took root. What if survival isn't about winning? What if survival is about learning how to lose? They say dawn comes slowest when you need it most. I sat there on the porch, feeling the weight of 15 years settle into my bones, watching the sunrise burn gold across a sky that had no idea it was lighting up broken lives. But that's the thing about mornings, they come anyway. A few weeks later, after everything was filed and final and the house was half-packed in boxes we didn't even label, I stood in the living room, holding a photo of the four of us. Me, Sarah, Eli, and Grace. Happier times. Or at least simpler ones. I didn't throw it away. I put it in a box labeled truth. Because pretending the good times didn't happen doesn't heal you. Owning them, the good, the bad, and the unspeakably ugly, does. I moved into a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy. One bedroom. A balcony just big enough for a chair and a grill I barely knew how to use. It wasn't much. But it was mine. Eli came over every weekend. We grilled burgers. Watched dumb movies. Played music too loud. Sometimes he'd bring friends, and the place would rattle with life. I even started seeing a therapist regularly, not because I was broken, but because I was smart enough to know that broken things can be mended when you stop pretending they're fine. And slowly, inch by inch, the grief softened. I learned that survival wasn't about winning or being the better person. It was about waking up. Getting out of bed. Choosing, every damn day, to put one foot in front of the other even if some mornings, your legs didn't quite remember how. It was about forgiving yourself for the things you didn't know back when you thought you knew everything. A quote I found and pinned to my wall said it best. Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. J.K. Rowling. And that's exactly what I did. Built new dreams. Brick by hard-earned brick. To whoever's still reading this, still fighting through their own wreckage, let me leave you with this. Love fiercely. Fight for the people you love before the cracks become canyons. Listen when the words get quiet. Hold hands when it's easier to fold your arms. And if you lose something beautiful, if it slips through your fingers despite everything you did, know this. It doesn't mean you are broken beyond repair. It means you're human. It means your story isn't over. And someday, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday you will stand in the sun again, stronger for all the nights you thought you wouldn't make it. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. And if you're still breathing, still believing, still fighting, you're already winning.